Today, we're going to talk about that lapse in judgment. What happens when you have a carb bomb? I'm talking about the pastry. For the sake of science, I ate this matcha scone filled with chocolate chips and mochi. Oh, the glucose spike will be incredible. And I'm using this CGM, continuous glucose monitor, to track what happens when it hits my body in terms of relative blood glucose from baseline to spike and what we can do to lower that spike. Don't panic. There is a solution, and we're going to talk about that solution today. Essentially, walk it off. Yes, how it works is this. When you eat a scone, a pastry, a croissant, anything that's carb heavy, pasta, cheesecake, 30 minutes after that first bite, you will see it slowly rise, or for some people, rise pretty quickly. And you know what you do? You start to walk. So what I'm doing is I'm tracking how my blood glucose is affected by first the scone and then the walk. Now, the suggestion is to walk 10 minutes right after you eat. So why right after you eat? Well, let's look at it realistically. The minute you take a bite of any kind of food, pasta, rice, pastry, right? If it has carbs, it takes about 30 minutes for the carbs to hit your system. And a typical meal is about what? 30 to 45 minutes, right? So the minute that meal is done, oh, you're spiking. Check out what happened to me. I only had the coffee and the scone, and boom, 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 I'm done eating. But from my first bite, measured from 1:30 until the spike begins around 2 o'clock, there you have it. I got to start walking. So let's start walking. Now, I'm tracking with my CGM fed through Aura. So I use an Aura ring because it integrates with my Stello CGM and it works great, right? It tracks my meals, the spikes, my activity, and it helps me illustrate what happens. And obviously, this is my body. Your body will be different, but the lesson is the same. Eat carbs, sugar spikes. Some people spike more, some people spike less, but it's also the solution that's important, and that's the walk. So check it out. 30 minutes after I eat it, I get that spike, I start walking, and voila. During that 15-minute walk, it starts to drop. But what happens when I stop walking? I get in the car, I drive to the studio, it starts to spike again. I'm like, let's add another 15-minute walk. Boom, it drops again. And now we are about 4 hours later, right? I ate at 1:30, it's close to 5:30 now. Finally, my sugar level's back to normal. But this is why we tell people, if you are approaching prediabetes, you're pre-diabetic, you're afraid of getting prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, although this is not medical advice, always talk to your doctor, of course, it gives you an idea why people should be avoiding carbs if they're at risk. Now, the point of this video is not to villainize carbs. Carbs have their role, but if you are metabolically challenged, meaning you're at risk, prediabetes, you are afraid of getting type 2 diabetes, and you want to do something about it, well, you see what happens with carbs. And in contrast, let's say, what if I didn't eat carbs in my meal? So I had a meal before that. What did I have? An amazing steak breakfast with salad. All I had was the picanha steak, a salad, arugula salad, some balsamic dressing, barely any movement. Check it out, right? So right there you see, whoa, if anything, it stayed the same, which is very rare, right? People thinking, wait, how can it stay the same? I specifically made sure not to have any carbs in that meal, and it was very filling. Why was it filling? Protein, fats from the steak, plus the chimichurri sauce, olive oil, kind of fatty there, and an amazing arugula salad. I was pretty full after that meal, but then I thought, for the sake of science, what happens if I have a scone, right? So about an hour, hour and a half later, I hit the scone and boom, you saw what happened there, right? But what did we do? We took the walk. So let's talk about why this walk helps. So there are two ways your body deals with this blood glucose spike: insulin and muscle contraction. We'll start with insulin, and this is the insulin resistance issue that many people are concerned with. As you become more insulin resistant, the insulin is unable to pull that sugar out of your bloodstream. And so your blood glucose starts to rise. And the more it rises, the more you have problems with inflammation, because that blood glucose is sitting in your bloodstream, thus prediabetes and later type 2 diabetes. However, if you walk, there's a different pathway to remove glucose from your blood, and that is your muscles. Once they start contracting, they pull the glucose out of your bloodstream to power the muscles, and that's why you walk, right? Walking is a great way to pull that glucose out of your blood if you don't want to have insulin resistance, because a bit too much exposure to sugar for some people, like myself, will lead to some level of insulin resistance, and thus your A1C starts to rise, 5.0, 5.3, 6.0. Now you're like, what do I do? Quite simply, if you cannot avoid carbs, because life happens, like my scone, take a walk. Now, research has shown that 10-minute walk after each meal, helpful, not only helpful, but it is more effective in addressing these blood glucose spikes than a 45-minute exercise session in the morning. So let's say you exercise for 45 minutes and then you have 3 meals that day, and each meal has some carbs. If you didn't have the 45-minute exercise session and you only took that 10-minute walk after each meal, that was more effective than the 45-minute exercise session in the morning, not after a meal. Because why? The exercise session is no longer effective in reducing glucose 3 hours later, because the muscle contraction all done, right? You're no longer pulling glucose out of your bloodstream. And so this is why, for those who are metabolically challenged, it is great to walk after every meal. So this is great news for those who hate exercise. You don't have to do both. You don't have to exercise for 45 minutes in the morning and then walk after every meal. Just focus on walking after every meal. And if you have time, if you can work it into your schedule, create a fitness plan for yourself. But let me know in the comments below. Is this a solution you thought of? Will you start walking after a carb-heavy meal? Until next time, my friends, FOMO this.